In a quiet suburb where time seems to slow down and everyone in the neighborhood knows everyone else, it was supposed to be a normal summer day. A black family, enjoying a well-deserved day off, fired up the grill in their backyard, cooking up juicy steaks and flavorful vegetables. The laughter of children, the faint smoke of the barbecue, and the sounds of music filled the air. But the calm was illusory, because around the corner, watching from her window, an elderly neighbor had already begun dialing 911, certain that something was wrong. Little did she know that this call would be the beginning of an event that would change not only her view of the world, but also open the eyes of an entire community. Could an ordinary barbecue become the catalyst for exposing deeply ingrained prejudices? While waiting for the operator to answer, the neighbor glanced once more toward the yard where the family was noisily celebrating. She was already mentally imagining the patrol car arriving, how the order and peace she had become so accustomed to in this area would be restored. After all, she had seen on the news more than once how such companies could turn quiet streets into a place of disorder. She was sure that she was doing the right thing. But when the police arrived, her expectations began to crumble one after another. It wasn't just officers who got out of the car, but a man whose face seemed familiar to her, although she couldn't remember where from. Approaching the cheerful group, he greeted the head of the family, hugged him and whispered something in his ear. The neighbor, watching this scene from behind the curtain, felt uneasy. Everything that was happening was clearly not going according to her plan. The officer everyone called Chief turned and looked straight at her. It was as if he could see her through the wall, through time and space. She cringed under his gaze, which was both kind and full of unspoken reproach. And then he walked slowly toward her door. The knock on the door was unexpectedly loud. The neighbor's heart began to pound, and she slowly opened the door, not knowing what awaited her. At that moment, all her confidence, all the righteous anger that had pushed her to take this step, suddenly evaporated. The new police chief stood at the threshold, and she realized that the face that seemed familiar to her, she had recently seen on the news. The same man she had just complained about was now her new protector, her new guardian of order. The police chief looked at her with a slight smile and asked quietly, "May I help you, ma'am?" In that moment, her entire world turned upside down. The neighbor realized that her deep-seated prejudices had come to the surface. And now, standing in front of her, she had a man who could have destroyed her complaint with one word. But instead he was offering her a dialogue, a chance to rethink her beliefs and move beyond stereotypes. It was this day that marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship that made the entire neighborhood think about what was really hidden behind seemingly simple actions and decisions. The neighbor slowly looked up at the police chief, trying to find words, but her lips felt numb. Before her stood the man she had thought a threat, but who turned out to be the one who could break this vicious circle of mistrust and hatred. His face, illuminated by the soft sunlight, did not express anger or reproach. On the contrary, his eyes shone with warmth and wisdom, which spoke of the fact that he had seen and experienced much. He bowed his head slightly, waiting for an answer, and the neighbor, feeling tears welling up in her eyes, finally broke the silence. I thought," she began, but her voice betrayed her, and the trembling in her knees made her press herself against the door frame. She couldn't finish the sentence, but the boss understood everything without words. "I understand, ma'am," he replied with a slight sigh, but without a hint of judgment in his voice. "Sometimes our fears and prejudices prevent us from seeing people as they really are, but I'm sure you can change your mind. The world around us is changing, and we must all learn to change with it." Those words, spoken with such calm and confidence, resonated in her heart. The neighbor suddenly realized how narrow and prejudiced her views had been. She had always prided herself on her ability to judge people by their actions, but this day had shown her that her understanding of the truth was too limited. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not knowing how to express her guilt for this reckless call. She felt the weight on her soul begin to lift, as if these words cleared her of years of burden. The chief smiled slightly, nodding in understanding. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them. We are all part of one community, and we all need to strive for peace and understanding." His words were like balm to her wounded conscience. A moment ago she had been ready to defend her convictions, but now she felt that a new path had opened up before her. A path where there was no room for fear of what you did not understand, for prejudice, for empty judgment. The police chief nodded amiably and, having said his goodbyes, returned to the family. who continued to enjoy themselves by the grill, unaware of the drama that was unfolding behind the door. The neighbor watched them go, feeling her heart fill with a new feeling, not just remorse, but also a desire to change her life. Her gaze lingered on the head of the family, who at that moment picked up his little son in his arms and laughed so loudly and infectiously that it could not leave her indifferent. At that moment, she made a decision. The next day, she approached them, carrying a large plate of her signature apple pie. With a shy smile, she offered it to the boss and his family, unsure if they would accept her gesture, but determined to start over. When the chef, surprised but touched, accepted the treat and invited her to join him for a barbecue, she realized that this day was the beginning not only of a new friendship, but also of her own journey to self-awareness. This was the day she had the opportunity to rethink her values and her views, and she was not going to let it pass. Neighbors began to join in, and soon the entire neighborhood was gathered around the grill that had so recently become the source of discord. Laughter, smiles, and conversation filled the space, creating an atmosphere of unity and harmony. The neighbor felt her heart fill with a warmth she had not felt in a long time. From that day on, everything changed, not just for her, but for the entire community, which finally realized that true strength comes from unity, not division. As the neighbor sat at the communal table, surrounded by people she had barely noticed before, she felt her worries slowly dissolve in this new sense of belonging. Every laugh, every smile, and friendly gesture reminded her of the importance of humanity, of how easily all this misunderstanding could be avoided by simply opening her heart. The meat sizzled on the grill, filling the air with the aroma of smoke and spices, and even the surrounding nature seemed to respond to this sudden reconciliation. The sun gently touched the trees, painting their leaves in golden hues, as if approving of what was happening. The neighbor sat next to the police chief's wife, who, without holding a grudge, began to tell her about her family, how they had moved to the area, hoping for a new life in a calm and friendly place. There was no hint of reproach in the woman's voice, only a sincere desire to improve relations and be part of this community. The neighbor listened, surprised at how similar she and this woman turned out to be. They both wanted the same things for their families: safety, peace, and simple human happiness. As time went on, the conversations around the table became more and more animated. The police chief, who was at ease with everyone, kept up conversations, joked, and told stories that made everyone laugh. This man, whom she had so feared and at the same time almost hated, turned out to be the life of the party, a man who could rally people around him, regardless of their skin color or social status. As evening cast its shadows over the neighborhood and the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, one of the neighbors suggested lighting a small fire in the center of the yard. People brought their chairs, forming an impromptu circle around the fire. The light from the fire illuminated the faces of those gathered, and in its warm glow all differences seemed to disappear. The neighbor, feeling something new and important flaring up in her soul, looked up at the police chief. She had been looking for a long time for the right moment to thank him for everything he had done. But now, sitting next to him by the fire, she realized that words were no longer necessary. He understood everything himself. At one point, the police chief, noticing her gaze, nodded slightly in response, as if to say, "We all deserve a second chance, and you deserve one, too." There was more to those words than forgiveness. There was new hope, a chance to start over, one built on trust and mutual respect. The night came to an end, and the neighbors began to go home. But this was not just a normal goodbye. They felt closer to each other, that they now had a common history, a connecting thread that would strengthen their relationship in the future. The neighbor walked home along the quiet, starlit street, and her heart filled with joy. That evening, she had not only gotten rid of prejudices, she had found new friends and realized that the world she would live in from now on would be much brighter and warmer than she could have imagined. Since then, the area that was once just another place to live has become a true home for all of its inhabitants. And if anyone still wondered what real strength and unity are, the answer could be found in a friendship that was born over a barbecue that began with mistrust but ended with greater reconciliation and hope for a better future. The neighbor tossed and turned in her bed most of the night, unable to find peace. Despite the warm atmosphere of the party and the friendly conversations, Something disturbing kept her awake. She had a strange dream. All her neighbors were gathered around the same fire again, but their faces were hidden in the shadows, and there were whispers of concern all around. When she tried to get closer to hear what they were saying, the shadows began to disappear one by one, and soon she was left alone in front of the already extinguished fire. When the neighbor woke up the next morning, she decided that all this was simply the aftermath of the unrest of the last few days. But inside her, a vague feeling was growing that something was left unfinished. She decided that she needed to talk to the police chief again to finally get rid of these doubts. When she got to his house, her heart started beating faster again. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. Then she noticed a neighbor boy playing nearby and asked him where the boss's family was. The boy hesitated for a second, then said in surprise, "But they left last night. I saw them all get into a car and drive away late at night." The neighbor was confused. They had left? Why had no one told her? She suddenly felt a wave of strange anxiety wash over her. She ran to the other neighbors to find out what had happened, but they all, as if by agreement, claimed to know nothing. No one had seen the chief's family preparing to leave, and no one had noticed any signs that they were about to leave. Doubts began to gnaw at her insides. Why had they left so suddenly, without saying goodbye? Why hadn't a single neighbor noticed? She decided to contact the local police department to find out where the family might have disappeared to. At the station, she was met by the duty officer. She began to explain the situation, hoping that he could clarify at least something, but in response she received stunning news. "Ma'am, we haven't had a new police chief," the officer said, looking puzzled. "Our chief, as always, is Mr. Harris. He's been in office for over a decade and he's not going anywhere. There must have been some mistake. Are you sure you haven't got someone else mixed up?" The neighbor felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. A mistake? But she had personally spoken to this man. She had seen his family. They had been at the barbecue yesterday. All the neighbors could confirm this. She insisted that it was impossible, that she knew exactly who she had spoken to. But the officer just shook his head. "Ma'am, we have no record of any new police officer in this area. It may have been someone else, but it certainly wasn't from our precinct." Back home, the neighbor, distraught, tried to contact other neighbors to make sure that this wasn't a figment of her imagination. But to her surprise, no one could remember the police chief, who had been with them at the barbecue the day before, giving his name or mentioning anything personal. Everyone seemed to be in a strange amnesia, saying only that everything was fine and no one had paid attention to the details. Eventually, she realized that something was wrong with this story, that they had encountered something that went beyond ordinary reality. Maybe this was a test for all of them, a chance to see the world and people differently, a chance to reconsider their views. Or maybe it was some mystical force that had intervened in their lives to change them forever. The neighbor sat by the window for a long time, thinking about what had happened, and understood only one thing: in this world there are things that cannot be explained by logic, but which can change us forever, forcing us to look at life from a different angle. And although she never found answers to all her questions, one thing became clear: she would never be the same again, just like her neighbors who witnessed this mysterious and strange story. The neighbor could not find peace for several days. What she had experienced seemed both a dream and reality at the same time. Her anxiety grew with each passing hour until she finally decided to visit the house where the police chief's family lived. As soon as she approached it, she was overcome by the feeling that something had changed. The house looked abandoned, the windows were covered with curtains, and there was not the slightest sign of life. She gathered her courage and knocked on the door. Her heart beat faster than ever as she waited for an answer. But no one answered. Then she walked around the house and looked in the windows. To her surprise, there was no furniture inside. The whole space was empty, as if the house had been abandoned long ago. But how could this be? After all, only yesterday was full of life. Not believing her eyes, the neighbor returned home and tried to find some explanation for what was happening. She looked through old photos she had taken at the party and noticed something strange. In every picture where the boss or his family should have been, their faces were blurred, as if they were just a shadow, a fuzzy silhouette. Her mind was seething with unanswered questions. Deciding that the only way out was to find out more about this house and its former inhabitants, she headed to the local archive. She thought that there she would be able to find at least some information that would help to unravel this tangle of mysteries. She spent several hours in the archive, looking through old documents, newspapers, and reports. Finally, her efforts were rewarded. She found a note dated 20 years earlier. The article told of a tragic incident. The house she had just been in once belonged to the family of a well-known policeman in the city, who had died tragically in the line of duty. The article mentioned that his wife and children had left the house shortly after his death, and it had been empty ever since. Her heart began to pound as she realized that the description of the dead cop matched the image of the same chief she had spoken to at the barbecue. But how could that be? She had seen him, spoken to him. It was as if a cold wind had run across her skin, and her thoughts began to form a frightening picture. Leaving the archive, she returned to her neighbors to talk to them again. But their answers only increased her anxiety. All of them assured her that they did not remember the faces of the chief, or even the names of his family. It seemed that the whole story was beginning to be erased from their memories, as if it had never happened. One night, when the anxiety was at its height, the neighbor heard strange sounds outside her window. She looked outside and froze. On the street, in the foggy light of a street lamp, stood the figure of the police chief. He did not move, he just stood there and looked straight at her house. His eyes glowed with something unnatural, and on his face was the same friendly but mysterious smile that she had seen before. Gathering all her courage, she went outside and approached him. But as she approached, his figure began to melt into the air like smoke. Before he disappeared, he quietly said, "Thank you for listening to me and my family. Now we can rest in peace." And with that, he was gone, leaving only a faint trail of mist behind him. The neighbor was left standing alone, aware that she had become part of something inexplicable. But instead of fear, she felt a deep sense of relief. She realized that this family, so long gone, needed help, not physical help, but emotional help to finally pass on. From that moment on, a strange calm settled in her heart. She no longer felt anxious, and the boss's house, which had once been empty, soon began to come alive again. A new family moved in, who, as it turned out, did not even know about the past of this place. The neighbor, watching them from the window, realized that the story of this family had finally ended, and now it was time for a new chapter. But she knew that she would never forget that strange and unforgettable evening that changed her life forever. Over the next few weeks, life in the neighborhood returned to normal, but the neighbor could not forget the strange story she had witnessed that evening in her meeting with the police chief, who, as it turned out, had long since passed away. Changed her outlook on many things. She began to look at the world with a new openness, ready to accept what was beyond the ordinary. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she saw a new neighbor who had recently moved into the police chief's house. He was a middle-aged man with a friendly smile and bright eyes that seemed strangely familiar. "Hello, my name is Daniel. I recently moved into the house next door and would like to meet you," he said, extending his hand. The neighbor smiled warmly and invited him for a cup of tea. They sat in the kitchen and the conversation began easily, as if they had known each other for many years. Daniel said that he had recently moved to the city for work and hoped to find peace and a new home for his family. But as they talked, she began to feel like there was more to Daniel than met the eye. His mannerisms, his voice, were all strangely familiar, but she couldn't quite place where she'd met this man. At one point, he looked up and asked, "You knew about this house's past, didn't you?" The neighbor felt a chill run down her spine. "Yes," she answered quietly, trying not to show her excitement. "I know that the family of a police officer who died tragically used to live here." Daniel nodded, his face turning serious. "This house has a long history. My father was the policeman who lived here. My family left this house after he died, but recently I decided to come back. It was strange, but something was drawing me here, as if my father wanted me to continue his work, or perhaps finish something he didn't have time to do." The neighbor froze, realizing that the son of the very police chief she had spoken to so recently was sitting in front of her. Her mind raced, trying to connect all these strange events. "You know, when I was a child, my father often told me that the people we lose are never completely gone. He believed that they stay with us. protecting us and helping us in difficult times. I always thought that these were just fairy tales for children, but when I came back here, I began to feel his presence, especially at night. It's a strange feeling, but it brings me peace and confidence." The neighbor couldn't resist telling Daniel about what had happened to her a few weeks ago. She told him about the barbecue night, how she saw his father, the conversation with him, and how it all led to the chef disappearing into the fog. Daniel listened attentively, never interrupting. When she finished, he said quietly, "Thank you for sharing this. Now I understand why I was drawn here so much. My father just wanted to make sure we finished his work and found peace. You helped him, and for that I am very grateful." He stood up to leave, but before he did, he said, "You know, maybe this isn't a coincidence. We're all connected through our stories, through our ancestors, and I'm glad my family has found such peace in this place because of you. I hope you can find peace now, too." After Daniel left, the neighbor sat in the kitchen for a long time, lost in her thoughts. She realized that everything that had happened was part of something bigger than she could have imagined. This house, this story, this family, they were all connected, like threads in a single fabric of fate. From that day on, she felt that she had truly found peace. She now knew that the people we lose can come back into our lives to help us complete unfinished business. And although she never saw the police chief again, she knew that his spirit had found peace, knowing that his family was now safe and in their place. Life in the area continued, but now everything here seemed a little different, brighter, more harmonious. The neighbor felt that she, too, had become part of the story, and that her life, like the lives of everyone around her, was woven into a single fabric of fate, which, despite all its twists and turns, leads to peace and understanding. A few months passed and life in the neighborhood returned to a calm rhythm. The neighbor continued to enjoy a new sense of peace and connection to the community. Daniel's house became the center of new gatherings and events, and his friendliness and openness made him a favorite among the neighbors. Everything seemed calm and normal, until one day something unexpected happened. One autumn evening, as it was getting dark outside, a neighbor found a strange package on her doorstep. It was small, tied with a simple string, and had no address or sender's name. Inside the package was an old leather journal, with a name carefully carved into the cover, Daniel Harris. At first she thought it might be a mistake, but then she remembered that the name belonged to the son of a police officer she knew about. Her heart began to beat faster with excitement and anxiety. She unfolded the diary and began to read. The pages were filled with neat handwriting describing Daniel's life and experiences, as well as his relationship with his father. The journal contained entries that shocked her. They mentioned a strange family secret. For many years, before his father's death, the Harris family had experienced mysterious and unexplained phenomena. According to Daniel, his father believed that an ancient spirit lived in the house, connected to the destinies of those who lived there. The entries also contained references to ancient legends that spirits sometimes take physical forms to complete their unfinished business and achieve peace. One entry in particular caught her attention. It spoke of a family belief that the house contained a hidden key to closure that could help calm the spirit attached to the place. Daniel wrote that the key was somewhere in the house and that he needed to find it to help his father find final peace. The neighbor couldn't ignore this. The feeling that she was connected to this story only grew stronger. She decided to talk to Daniel to find out if he himself was looking for this key and if he could help her in her search. When she met Daniel and told him about her discovery, his face turned pale. "I thought it was all over," he said, clearly worried. "But if it's what I think it is, we need to find that key. It might be something I couldn't find before." They decided to return to the house to conduct a thorough investigation. Daniel, armed with a diary and an old plan of the house that he found in the archives, together with a neighbor, began to search every corner. Perhaps the most mysterious was the old room in the basement, which no one had ever talked about. The room was foggy and smelled strangely of ancient wood and damp stone. On the wall hung an old painting depicting ancient symbols and signs that Daniel recognized from his father's writings. Understanding dawned on his face. These symbols indicated the place where the key was to be hidden. They began to dismantle the old shelves and racks, and suddenly, behind one of them, Daniel discovered a hidden niche. Inside the niche was an old wooden box. Daniel opened it, and inside they saw an ancient key made of gold with an intricate design. As soon as the key was in their hands, everything around them changed. a strange light suddenly appeared in the house, and the fog that had enveloped the basement began to dissipate. The neighbor and Daniel felt a strange calm, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "This is it," Daniel said, looking at the key. "This is what we've been looking for. It looks like we can now complete what started all those years ago." They went up to the top floor and found the ancient cabinet mentioned in the diary. The key fit the lock perfectly, and when they opened the cabinet, they found an ancient family heirloom inside, and a message from Daniel's father, speaking of forgiveness and final peace. In that moment, everything became clear. What had begun as a story about a police officer with a bond to this house had ended with justice and peace being restored. The spirit that had once haunted this place could finally leave, knowing that its work had been completed. The neighbor and Daniel, feeling that they had completed an important mission, left the house and saw that the light from the lanterns illuminated the street, as if congratulating them on the end of this unusual story. Although Daniel and his family continued to live in the house, it was now surrounded by a new atmosphere of peace and tranquility. The neighbor, seeing how everything around her had changed, realized that every story, even the most mysterious, has its ending, which brings peace and understanding. As time went on and the area continued to develop, the story of the house and its inhabitants remained in people's hearts as a reminder that even the most confusing and inexplicable things can find their resolution, if only we do not lose faith in miracles. After Daniel and the neighbor found the key and completed their search, life in the neighborhood became calm and normal again. Daniel continued to settle into the house, and his family soon joined him, bringing warmth and comfort to the house. The neighbor continued to maintain good relations with the new family and the rest of the neighbors, and whenever they got together, they discussed their strange story as something that brought them closer together. However, after some time, when everything seemed calm and predictable, a new, unexpected chapter began. One late autumn evening, when the leaves turned red and fell, a neighbor noticed that strange events had begun in Daniel's house. At first, these were small things, incomprehensible noises from the basement, a slight smell of old wood that was sometimes felt in the house, and random flickering of light. She decided not to panic and took it with a grain of salt, but soon it all started to get worse. One night, she heard a loud cracking sound in the house behind the wall. The next morning, Daniel came to her with a worried face. "Sorry to bother you, but something strange is going on here," he said. "It happens every night and I can't explain it. I don't know who to turn to." The neighbor offered to help and offered to check the house with him. They started in the basement, where they found that the old wood flooring had begun to crack and sag. Daniel called a home expert, but he found no structural problems, and his explanations were not satisfactory to either Daniel or the neighbor. In search of a solution, they decided to conduct their own investigation. They began to study the history of the house in more detail. In the archive, they found documents that confirmed that the house was built on an old burial ground that was once used as a burial place for residents in the last century. This discovery explained why strange things could happen in the house, related to the history of the place. They also found that the home's previous owners had experienced similar phenomena but had moved quickly, abandoning the home shortly after purchasing it. This confirmed that the problems with the home may have deep roots in its history. Daniel and her neighbor decided to turn to historians and paranormal experts to sort out the situation. The experts confirmed that unknown phenomena can sometimes occur in places with a rich history, and suggested conducting a cleansing ritual to remove the negative energy. After performing a ritual with the help of a local spiritual mentor and history expert, they were able to clear the house of negative energies. However, during the ritual, it became clear that the previous house had indeed had some connection to tragic events, but now it no longer bothered the current inhabitants. After the cleansing, the house became much more comfortable and calm. Daniel, although he experienced a lot of anxiety, was pleased that he managed to deal with the problem, and the neighbor was grateful for her support and cooperation. The story that began with a foggy past and strange occurrences has now become a lesson in the importance of addressing the roots of problems and considering history when assessing the present. Daniel and the neighbor have moved on with their lives, becoming closer and understanding that the past can sometimes interfere with the present, but through honesty, perseverance, and cooperation, peace and understanding can be found. The neighbor continued to communicate with Daniel and his family, and their friendship only grew stronger, and they became not just neighbors, but real friends. Life in the neighborhood became predictable again, but now its inhabitants valued the present moments more and understood that sometimes, in order to solve problems, you need to delve into history and try to understand it more deeply. With the onset of winter and the Christmas spirit, the neighborhood was once again quiet and peaceful. Residents enjoyed the holidays by decorating their homes and spending time with family and friends. Daniel and a neighbor organized a joint Christmas event for the entire neighborhood to celebrate the return of normalcy and to express gratitude for the support and friendship. The party was fun and cozy. Everyone was laughing and sharing stories. However, as the party progressed, Daniel approached his neighbor and quietly said, "There's something I'd like to talk to you about in private. It's quite important." After the party was over and the guests had left, Daniel and his neighbor sat by the fireplace in the living room. He looked serious, but his eyes were shining with determination. "I've been thinking for a long time about how to tell you about this," he began. "You know that after the cleansing ritual, the house became calm, and I am very grateful to you for your help. But there is one thing I did not mention earlier. During the ritual, we discovered an old safe in the basement, which seemed to have been forgotten and hidden there many years ago." Daniel continued, "The safe was locked, but after cleaning it out, we decided to open it. Inside, we found old documents and several letters that appeared to have been written by my grandfather. These letters tell the story of how he and his family tried to hide certain aspects of their lives in this house to protect themselves from persecution and fear. But one letter I want to show you contains something particularly important." He pulled an envelope out of his pocket and handed it to his neighbor. Inside was a carefully written document that not only described the history of the Harris family, but also mentioned a mysterious connection to another old building in town. The letter spoke of some ancient heritage that could explain why strange things were happening in their home. "My grandfather wrote that his family was connected to some ancient order that guarded sacred knowledge and artifacts. These things were hidden in different places, and one of them, he believed, could be hidden in another old building in the city center, which now looks abandoned." Daniel and the neighbor discussed what to do with the documents they had found. After much deliberation, they decided that this might be a chance to finally solve the mystery that had tied them to this house for years. They agreed to explore this abandoned building in the city center. A few days later, they went to the old building. It was a dilapidated mansion that had long stood empty and abandoned. At first glance, it was clear that the building needed serious restoration, but armed with the old plans and documents they found, they began their exploration. The interior of the building was dark and damp, with the smell of rot and ancient wood. They began by searching for hidden rooms and niches. After several hours of work, they found a secret room behind one of the walls. Inside the room, among dusty chests and ancient books, they found another safe, which was sealed. After struggling to open the safe, they found several ancient artifacts that looked like ritual objects, and several more notes. One of the letters explained that the artifacts were part of an ancient ritual kit related to the protection and preservation of knowledge about spiritual practices that were supposed to help the Harris family maintain contact between the worlds of the living and the dead. When Daniel and the neighbor examined these objects, they realized that they were all connected to their family history and the strange phenomena they had been experiencing. These artifacts were not evil, but rather defense mechanisms that could create misunderstandings and fears if not understood correctly. They decided to return the artifacts they had found to the house and, with the help of historians and spiritual experts, to install them in a suitable location. This not only helped complete the personal history of the Harris family, but also brought an understanding of the importance of respecting and studying history in order to properly assess what is happening in the present. Over time, the house became a place where locals would come to learn about its history and see artifacts. Daniel and a neighbor opened a small museum exhibit that told the story of the family and their connection to the history of the city. This attracted attention and sparked interest among people, helping them to better understand and appreciate the heritage. Now the area was known for its history and culture, and Daniel and her neighbor continued to work together to maintain the connection between the past and the present. Life returned to normal, but with a new understanding of the importance of history and heritage that connects us to our roots. A few months passed, and the opening of a small museum exhibition in Daniel's house brought many positive changes. The museum became a popular place for tourists and locals interested in the history of the city and its cultural heritage. Not only did the place attract visitors, but it also became a hub for the local community, organizing educational events and historical lectures. One day, At the height of the tourist season, the museum received an unusual request. The letter, which arrived in the mail, said that a historian in a neighboring town had found old documents related to the history of the Harris family and wanted to donate them to the museum. The document was timed to coincide with an important anniversary associated with the family and could shed light on some unclear moments in their history. Daniel and the neighbor were waiting impatiently for the historian to arrive with the documents. When he arrived, he was very excited. The documents he brought included old diaries, maps, and letters that once belonged to their ancestors. One of the letters in particular caught their attention. It was a letter written in an old language, but its contents were translated into modern English. The letter described a conspiracy that was taking place in the city in the early 20th century. It spoke of how the Harris family, in addition to its role in protecting spiritual practices, was also involved in an important network that helped combat secret societies that tried to use occult knowledge for their own gain. This letter confirmed that the Harris family was not only involved in spiritual practices, but also in the fight for truth and justice. Daniel and her neighbor were shocked. It turned out that their ancestors had played an important role in protecting the town from hidden threats, and that many of the strange phenomena they had experienced were linked to this hidden history. They decided to conduct new research to understand how this information fit into their own experiences. One interesting discovery was that the ancient artifacts they had found earlier may have been part of a larger defense system designed to preserve and protect important knowledge. This added another layer to understanding their history in connection to the house. With the help of new documents and information, the museum became even more intriguing. They updated the exhibition, adding new materials and organizing special exhibitions that told about the activities of the Harris family and their role in protecting the city. This attracted even more visitors and interest in the history of the local community. Soon, a number of volunteers and historians joined the museum to help with research and events. The museum became a true center of knowledge and discussion, where people could learn about the significance of their historical heritage and the importance of understanding their past to build a better future. Over time, Daniel and her neighbor became well-known local community activists, actively working to preserve the city's history and culture. They also began collaborating with local schools, offering educational programs and tours for students. This helped instill in the younger generation an interest in history and respect for heritage. She and her neighbor became good friends, and their friendship only grew stronger through their shared efforts. They continued to work on projects together and found new ways to support and develop the museum. They periodically held special events and celebrations, attracting more people and strengthening the ties in the community. Their work not only strengthened their connection to history, but also created new meaning and purpose for their lives. The Harris family story, which began as a mystery and a challenge, became a source of inspiration and knowledge for many. Thanks to their efforts, the city was able to better understand its roots and history, and the museum became a symbol of the strength of community and the importance of preserving cultural heritage. Life in the neighborhood and the museum continued in this new light, where everyone could find their connection to the past and become part of a larger story. Daniel and the neighbor found satisfaction in their work and in being able to bring peace and understanding to something that had once been forgotten, but now had its place and meaning again. Daniel and his neighbor's museum continued to flourish. They became active participants in city events, helping to organize historical festivals and educational programs. The museum was recognized as an important cultural center, and its success attracted the attention of not only local residents but the general public as well. However, life does not stand still, and a new event in the city has once again drawn attention to the house and the museum. The city administration announced plans to redevelop the central part of the city, including the area where the old mansion, which housed the museum, stood. This proposal caused public outrage among residents who did not want to lose an important historical site. Daniel and a neighbor decided to fight to save the museum. They organized a meeting with city officials to discuss the consequences of the reconstruction and try to find a compromise. The civic engagement and support from the local community was enormous, but the task was not easy. At the meeting, they presented arguments about the importance of the museum and its role in preserving the city's history. They talked about how the museum had become a center for cultural exchange and education, and how its closure would affect the preservation of historical memory and cultural heritage. the administration was touched by their passion and commitment. They proposed an alternative solution. Instead of completely rebuilding the city center, they could preserve the museum and move it to a new building, built specifically for this purpose, in another historic area of the city. This solution would preserve the historical heritage while modernizing the city's infrastructure. Daniel and her neighbor accepted the offer and became actively involved in the design of the new museum building. They worked with architects and designers to create a space that would retain the spirit of the original home, but would also be functional and modern. The new museum was designed to preserve the historic character and integrate elements that were found in the old building, including artifacts and unique architectural details. The move to the new building was a big deal. In the process, they also took the opportunity to update the exhibits and add new sections, not only on the Harris family, but on other aspects of the city and region's history. The new museum was opened with a grand opening attended by city councilors, local residents and many visitors. The new museum was equipped with modern presentation tools and educational resources, which allowed for a wider reach and better interaction with visitors. It became a new cultural center, capable of offering even more interesting programs and events. Daniel and her neighbor continued to work on projects and raise awareness of the museum. They organized regular lectures, exhibitions, and cultural events that helped maintain interest in the city's history and culture. The new museum became a popular destination for educational tours, research, and cultural exchanges. Over time, Daniel and her neighbor retired from active work at the museum, handing over the reins to new enthusiasts who continued their work with the same spirit of dedication. They themselves spent more time pursuing their personal interests and continuing to participate in the community, maintaining contacts with the museum. The museum, despite changes and challenges, remained a symbol of continuity and community strength. The Harris family history and their connection to the city continued to inspire new generations, demonstrating how the past and present can connect and enrich each other. Daniel and her neighbor were proud to have been able to preserve a legacy that began as a mystery and grew into an important cultural institution. And while each of them moved on with their lives, their story remained an important part of the city's history. Their efforts brought not only an understanding and respect for the heritage, but also created a space for future generations to learn about and appreciate their past while continuing to build a better future. The new museum became an important part of the city's cultural life, and its success attracted the attention of not only local residents but also researchers and tourists from around the world. Daniel and the neighbor, although they withdrew from active management, continued to participate in the life of the museum as honorary members and consultants, and their knowledge and experience were always in demand. However, one day, during one of his visits to the museum, Daniel noticed that a new oddity had appeared in the exhibition. He noticed that some of the exhibited objects began to disappear, and unfamiliar artifacts appeared among the new collections. This made him uneasy, as he remembered that each exhibit was carefully checked and documented. After reaching out to their neighbor, they decided to do their own investigation. Together with the museum team, they began checking records and inventories to see what might be going on. They soon discovered that in recent months, some of the transfer documents had been altered, and some artifacts had been added without explanation. While checking one of the storage rooms, they found that it was only accessible through a rare and complex security code. This indicated that someone had access to these areas and was able to manipulate the contents. Daniel and her neighbor decided they needed to call in security and investigation experts. They brought in an independent team of detectives and began an in-depth investigation. It soon became clear that the museum had been infiltrated by fraudsters who used their knowledge of the museum's internal structure to steal valuable items and replace them with fakes. But the most astonishing discovery was that someone from the museum's inner circle was behind it. After a thorough investigation, they discovered that one of the museum's recently hired employees was connected to a group specializing in the theft and sale of cultural artifacts. This employee used his knowledge of the museum's internal structure to bypass security systems and manipulate inventory. The police arrested the culprit, and with his help the stolen items were returned. As a result of the incident, the museum has made major upgrades to its security system and increased precautions to prevent similar incidents in the future. Following the incident, Daniel and her neighbor decided to review and update the museum's management strategy. They included new safety policies and procedures in staff training and implemented new technology to track and protect collections. This helped build trust in the museum and ensure its long-term sustainability. Over time, the museum returned to its normal life and even became more popular thanks to the lessons learned from the incident. A new management approach and improved security attracted even more visitors, and the museum once again became a center for cultural and educational exchange. Daniel and her neighbor remained active in the museum, but their role now became more social and educational. They organized lectures, workshops, and cultural events that attracted attention and maintained interest in history and culture. One day, during one of these lectures, a young researcher approached them and told them that he had found new information about the Harris family's past. This information concerned an ancient order with which their family was associated. And, as it turned out, there were additional documents in the archive that could shed new light on their history. Daniel and her neighbor decided to conduct joint research with a young researcher. This collaboration led to the creation of a new project dedicated to further studying and preserving the legacy of the Harris family and their role in the history of the city. They began working on creating a special exhibition and publishing new research that would help people better understand and appreciate the historical legacy. Thus, the museum continued to grow and bring knowledge and inspiration to new generations. Daniel and her neighbor, despite all the challenges, remained dedicated to their work, and their work brought joy and benefit to many. Their efforts in preserving history and culture continued to live in every corner of the museum and in the hearts of people, inspiring them to preserve and study their past. Several more years passed, and the museum continued to flourish under the direction of Daniel and his neighbor. A new project dedicated to uncovering more information about the Harris family and their connection to the ancient order was completed with great success. The special exhibition attracted the attention of historians, researchers, and the general public, further cementing the museum's status as an important cultural center. However, something unexpected happened in their lives. One day, when Daniel and his neighbor were giving a tour to a group of schoolchildren, their attention was drawn to a strange incident. One of the students accidentally came across an ancient key in one of the old books exhibited in the hall. An unknown symbol was engraved on the key, which did not match any of the ones they knew. After this incident, Daniel and the neighbor decided to conduct their own investigation to find out the origin of the key and its meaning. They began to study the symbol and look for information about its possible connection to the history of the Harris family. They soon discovered that the symbol was associated with an ancient cult that, according to local legends, once operated in their region. This cult, it turned out, was known for its rituals and artifacts that could be of great value and power. Daniel and a neighbor decided that they needed to investigate further to understand how the key could be connected to their family history and why it was in the museum book. In search of a clue, they turned to an expert in the occult sciences, who helped them decipher the meaning of the symbol and determine what historical period it belonged to. The search led them to ancient records that indicated that the key may have been part of a more complex system of protection and knowledge transfer used by cults to preserve their secret knowledge. With the help of an expert, they discovered that the key was part of a set of artifacts associated with a special ritual that, according to legend, was used to transmit great knowledge between a select few. This knowledge could be related to ancient technologies that were used for protection or to gain knowledge of other worlds. They decided that they needed to find a place where the key could be tied. Following clues from ancient records and old maps, they began looking for possible locations where something important could be located. This led them to an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, which had long been considered simply a historical monument. The building turned out to be much more complex than they had anticipated. They discovered hidden rooms and mechanisms that appeared to be part of a defense to hold an important artifact. With the help of a key and additional information they found, they were able to open one of the hidden niches and discover an ancient book and several mysterious objects. The book contained ancient texts and rituals that explained how to use the artifacts to gain knowledge and protect against various threats. These texts confirmed that the Harris family was indeed connected to this ancient cult and played an important role in preserving this knowledge. With the new discoveries, they decided to create a new exhibition in the museum dedicated to this ancient knowledge and the history of the Harris family. This exhibition became another attraction of the museum and attracted the attention of researchers and enthusiasts interested in ancient cultures and occult sciences. Along with the exhibition, they organized a series of educational programs and lectures dedicated to the new discoveries, allowing visitors to gain a deeper understanding of the history and significance of the artifacts found. The museum became an even more popular place for research and study, attracting scientists, students, and history buffs. Daniel and her neighbor continued to work actively on developing the museum and exploring new aspects of history. They also began collaborating with international research groups, sharing their findings and gaining new knowledge and resources for further research. Their work brought joy and satisfaction not only to them, but also to the many people who came to the museum to learn more about their cultural heritage and explore the mysteries of the past. As a result of their efforts, the museum became a symbol of continuity and the power of knowledge, showing how history can continue to inspire and enrich people's lives in the present and the future. Thus, the story of Daniel and his neighbor continued to evolve, their journey from mystery and investigation to discovering new horizons in cultural heritage served as an inspiration to many and a testament to the power and importance of preserving and studying history. Over time, the museum became a true center for cultural exchange and scientific research, attracting the attention of not only local residents but also the international community. A new project dedicated to ancient texts and artifacts attracted the attention of leading scientists and researchers, and the museum became a venue for conferences and seminars on occult sciences and ancient civilizations. One day, while preparing for another international conference, the museum received a mysterious message. The envelope, addressed to Daniel and a neighbor, contained an ancient scroll with unknown symbols and texts, accompanied by an anonymous letter. The letter contained a warning that the scroll was of special significance and should be examined carefully, as it could contain the key to yet undiscovered secrets. Concerned, Daniel and her neighbor decided to take the scroll to experts for decipherment. They worked with a team of historians, linguists, and cryptographers to understand the contents of the text. It soon became clear that the scroll was written in a language that had not been used for thousands of years, but some of the symbols and phrases were familiar. The deciphering revealed that the scroll contained information about a legendary artifact that had been lost for centuries. This artifact, according to the text, was associated with a power that could alter the perception of reality and provide access to deep knowledge about the universe. The text described the location of the artifact as in the heart of the earth, where two worlds intersect. Their research led them to believe that the artifact might be linked to a mythical place mentioned in ancient legends. This place, according to legend, was located in a hidden cave in a remote part of a region they had never searched before. Danielle, her neighbor, and a team of researchers began preparing for the expedition. They gathered equipment and resources to begin their search. During their preparations, they also consulted with local experts and historians who could help identify possible locations to begin their search. The expedition began with a careful and systematic search. They soon discovered ancient footprints and symbols that matched those on the scroll. These footprints led them to a hidden cave that had never been discovered before. Inside the cave they found many ancient traps and mechanisms protecting the entrance. But thanks to their attentiveness and preparation, they were able to overcome the obstacles and enter the depths of the cave. In one of its depths they found a large stone sarcophagus decorated with strange signs and symbols. After careful exploration and clearing, they opened the sarcophagus and discovered a stunning artifact inside, a glowing crystal surrounded by intricate engravings and metal elements. This crystal seemed to be the source of the power and knowledge spoken of in the ancient texts. Along with the find, they found additional ancient records and ritual objects that helped explain how to use the artifact and what precautions to take. An expert in occult sciences confirmed that the artifact did indeed have unique properties and was important for the study of ancient knowledge. Back at the museum, Daniel and his neighbor organized a special exhibition dedicated to the new finds. They also held a series of lectures and workshops in which they shared the results of their research and new discoveries. The artifact became the centerpiece of the exhibition, and its study attracted many scientists and enthusiasts. The museum continued to grow as an important center for the study of ancient knowledge and the occult, providing unique resources for scholars and researchers from around the world. Daniel and his neighbor continued to work hard, not only to maintain the museum's high standard, but also to expand its mission to preserve and disseminate knowledge. They began collaborating with international institutions and universities, organizing joint research and knowledge exchange. Their work led to new discoveries and publications that helped to better understand ancient civilizations and their impact on modern times. Thus, the museum, thanks to the efforts of Daniel and his neighbor, became a symbol of cultural and scientific progress, maintaining important traditions and opening new horizons for future generations. Their efforts not only preserved an important heritage, but also inspired many to study and preserve knowledge of the past so that they can use it to build a better future. As the museum began to process the new finds, things seemed to take a completely unexpected turn. One autumn, in the midst of an exhibition dedicated to the latest discoveries, Daniel and his neighbor received a strange message. It was written in an ancient language they had already encountered in their research. The letter contained instructions for a secret meeting that was to take place in the heart of the museum. According to the instructions, the meeting was scheduled for midnight, and the participants were to bring their most valuable artifacts and knowledge. The letter also mentioned that this meeting would only happen once every 1,000 years, and that it would lead to the revelation of unimaginable secrets. Puzzled, Daniel and his neighbor decided to follow the event. At the appointed time, they entered the museum, where a fascinating spectacle awaited them. All the exhibits began to emit a mysterious glow, and the ancient symbols on the walls began to glow brightly. They saw strange figures gathered in ancient robes, dressed in stylized costumes from different historical eras and cultures. These people were apparently the keepers of ancient knowledge, and each of them brought with them unique artifacts. One of the figures leading the gathering introduced herself as the head of the Order of Knowledge, an ancient secret society that preserved important knowledge and powers over time. She explained that the museum was not just a repository for antiquities, but part of an ancient ritual that had been planned centuries ago. According to her, the artifact found by Daniel and a neighbor was the key to unlocking the great secret contained in this place. It was part of the Code of Eternity, an ancient text that contained knowledge of abilities that could change the very nature of reality. The head of the order cast ancient spells, and the museum became the center of an incredible glow. Soon, Daniel and the neighbor noticed that the walls of the museum began to disappear, and they saw that they were surrounded not only by their own exhibits, but also by incredible views, as if they had been transported to another dimension. They found themselves in a space where times and cultures merged into one. Ancient cities, vanished civilizations, and unknown worlds were simultaneously visible and tangible. In this new space, they met representatives of ancient cultures and civilizations who spoke about their experiences and knowledge. The artifact was the key to time travel and interaction with cultures and civilizations that had once existed and disappeared, as well as to understanding hidden aspects of reality. Daniel and a neighbor discovered that they could interact with these cultures, exchange knowledge, and even influence the development of events in different time periods. The experience was incredible and full of wonder. They learned about abilities that were thought to be lost and were able to gain knowledge that could change the future of humanity. They saw how different civilizations developed and interacted with each other, which helped them understand deeper truths about the connection of all life. When the meeting ended, the museum returned to its normal reality, but with new insight and strength. Daniel and a neighbor retained their knowledge and artifacts, and their work continued with new inspiration and purpose. They decided to create a new project dedicated to the knowledge and experiences they had gained. This project included creating new educational programs, research projects, and exhibitions that would help people understand and use this ancient knowledge to build a better future. The museum became known not only as a repository of antiquities, but also as a center for new discoveries and knowledge, where connections could be made between the past, present, and future. Daniel and his neighbor continued their work, inspired by the incredible discoveries they had made, and sought to pass on this knowledge to new generations so that they could use it to advance humanity and preserve heritage. And so, the museum and its founders became symbols of how ancient mysteries can enrich and change modernity, opening up new horizons for understanding the world and our place in it. This is the end of this wonderful story. I hope you liked it, and you were imbued with this atmosphere. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as it promotes my video. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye everyone.